meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. And before we move to public comment, real quick, budget staff, any updates or procedural things we should know before we move into public comment?
No updates. What do you think?
Excellent. And so what's our procedure for public comment this evening?
Tanya Ellis is over here and will speak to the person who signed up. We do have one person signed up.
That person has not logged in as of yet. So we do have on our agenda from 5:30 to 6:30. Would you like for me to let you know if that person logs in?
Let's do that. So should I call the public comment piece to order and then close it, or should I leave it open, or what's the procedure on that?
This one is not an official public hearing. You did that on your first evening,
Excellent.
so I don't think you officially have to open it.
We will not do that. So if you'll let us know if they log in, then that would be great. And then we can go ahead and we'll just move forward. Okay, so the next thing that we'll jump to in the agenda is committee business. Let's go ahead and we have 4 minutes from the ones from May 3rd, May 5th, May 10th, and May 12th. All of the committee received those. Is there any recommended changes to those minutes? Or any other comments about those sets of minutes? We can break them out if you'd like. Yes, Commissioner.
I just have a small, I think it's a Scrivener's or a listening error. Pardon me. At one point, it's referred to as the, in the presentation from Public Health, the home servicing, and it's home visiting program.
Okay. Any other comments regarding the minutes? Is that a specific set of minutes?
I think it was the 10th. It was either the 10th or the 12th. I'm not remembering offhand right now. It was one of those two.
Very good. Any other items regarding those 4 sets of minutes? Okay. Anybody for a motion?
Move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Second.
Excellent. Thank you. And all those in favor of the minutes as amended, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Next section we have is the budget process recap. Our budget official will give us a comment or two in this section.
Happy to do that. Thank you, Chair. First, I'll say it's great to be in this room with all of you. We've spent a lot of time in this. I've spent a lot of time in this room over the last several years, and it's been a couple years since we've been in here. So it's great to be back in person. It's been a real treat to be in person during this budget committee process with all of you in the board's conference room, and have really, we have all appreciated the discussion and the serious focus on the challenges and opportunities that we have here in Lane County over the last couple weeks through our budget process. So I just want to offer a few comments as sort of a recap of this year's budget. A few themes that we've talked about there's definitely a focus in the budget on public safety, housing and shelter, infrastructure, workforce development, and an important call to action for a refocused approach to structurally balance our budget. We have seen a significant increase in demand for services over the last several years, and particularly the last 2 years. A few examples, you know, we've developed and worked in partnership with Homes for Good and other partners to develop 4 new permanent supportive housing units with over 160 units. We have provided 51,000 virtual behavioral health visits in the past year alone. Our primary and dental care service demands continue to grow. We saw 6,000 primary and dental care visits in March of this year alone. We've seen a 27% increase in developmental disability clients that have been served in the past year. We're projecting, the district attorney is projecting over 600 cases that will go to trial in 2022. We've seen an increase of 38% in electronic monitoring participants through the sheriff's office. So the list goes on and on in terms of the the increase in demand and the ways in which Lane County is responding to the needs for services in our community. It's also true that in response to that, we've seen significant growth in this organization over the course of the past decade. We reflected at the beginning of this process on how 10 years ago, Lane County was in a position that it had to eliminate nearly 200 positions, 200 employed positions in the organization due to significant declines in secure rural schools funding. Of course, this consistent challenge that we've had with a low permanent property tax rate and that is frozen since the mid-90s, and the declining federal funding that we have seen to support our local services. Since that time, in the past 8 years, our workforce has grown by nearly 700 positions. That's approximately 37% growth in the number of people that we employ here at Lane County to deliver services. And our budget has grown approximately 60% during that time. We talked about a little known fact that 60% of our budget, 60% of the resources that we utilize to deliver services in the community come from state and federal sources. 40% of our funding comes from local taxes and fees. So one of the things that Lane County does is leverage state and federal resources to deliver critical local services here. And that's really where we've seen the expansion in services, is from those state and federal programs and dollars. We've invested a lot in creating a culture, a strong culture of innovation and leadership in our workforce. We've seen our turnover rates lower than the national average. We've seen our employee satisfaction rates continue to increase. And, you know, while the labor market continues to be competitive and challenging, we have been very pleased at our ability to recruit and retain talent. We talked about a number of those examples of incredible people that continue to serve here in Lane County and that we have recruited to join our team. We've talked a lot over the last several weeks about the 4 funds. Lane County has 32 funds in which we collect different resources and that have different restrictions on how that money can get spent. We oftentimes talk about the general fund, which is where the local property tax dollars go, and it is the most discretionary of all of the funds. It has the fewest strings attached to it. Most of the federal and state dollars come with strings attached. They say you have to spend this money in this way, or some services that we provide locally, we charge a fee for, waste management, for example, and those resources have to get spent on those services. But the property tax dollars that we collect here in Lane County have some discretion to them. So we oftentimes through this process focus a lot on that general fund dollar, even though it's just one piece. It's one of the 32 funds that we have, but it also is the fund that provides resources for some of the most critical things that we do, particularly in the areas of public safety and general government services. So the 4 funds that we continue to struggle with, primarily the general fund, with approximately $2.3 million structural imbalance next year that will continue to grow as our expenses continue to outpace our revenues. The land management fund, which is heavily fee supported. Our parks fund that is also heavily fee supported with some local tax revenue through transient room taxes. And then our parole and probation fund that is heavily state funded. Those 3 other funds, land management, parole and probation, and parks, that are also structurally unbalanced. In most other counties throughout the state of Oregon, like Lane County, similar to Lane County, most other counties subsidize those funds with general funds because it's very difficult for those funds to provide the level of service that's necessary for the community on just the state funding that's provided or the local fees that are charged. So the general fund in most other counties subsidizes those funds. We don't do that in Lane County because our general fund dollar is so small. So it's another example of how we talked about sort of the interconnection of, you know, I think I refer to the general fund as the mothership, you know, that the healthier the general fund is, the healthier the rest of the funds and the rest of the organization is. The sicker the general fund is, the more challenged and stressed the other funds are. And we see that here. So it's just a reminder that even though we tend to focus our efforts in some particular areas, so much of what we do is interconnected. And then I'll just conclude by saying that as we move forward, one of the things that we have said in this budget is we've tried to call attention to the reality of the financial challenges, this perceived cloud of abundance, the state and federal dollars that we have received, that we are receiving to provide critical COVID and wildfire response and recovery efforts have been critical, but they won't last forever. They're going to get spent in the next few years, and then those dollars are going to be gone, and we will be left. The clouds will part, and we'll be left with the reality of the structural financial challenges that we have: a very low property tax rate that provides services to a large geographic area and a large population. And so we are going to need to start thinking differently about how we deliver services, moving away from, oftentimes counties are, I'm a champion for counties. I've worked in counties for over 20 years, so I love county government. But oftentimes, counties can demonstrate an insular sort of siloed approach because we are so vast. We provide services to such a large geographic area, to such a diversity of populations. We have various elected offices, and the diversity of services that we provide is very different. And so oftentimes as we go and we face challenges and we deal with issues, we're sort of looking individually at how do we solve this challenge? How do we deal with this issue? And one of the things that we're going to need to do, it's very difficult, but very important, is for us to think about the interconnection, places that we do connect, to work with innovation, with transformation, with modernization. These are words we've used. I know they're sort of buzzwords, but to evoke this idea of we need to think differently. We need to look at where do we generate revenue? Where do we provide services where we actually generate revenue? And we have some of those places that are revenue centers. Then we have other places that are cost centers. We can't really generate the revenue. We have to deliver a service that's critical, but we rely on a stagnant revenue that may not be enough to deliver the level of service. We have to understand where we make money and where we spend money and the interconnection between those areas, and really think about more creatively. And I'm saying this, we, the collective we, all of us here in Lane County, think about how we can solve these financial challenges and meet the needs of our community in different ways. How do we leverage those revenue centers to support those cost centers where there's connectivity in the people being served? So we have a lot of work ahead of us. We want to take the time to do this right. We've had, I think it's 4 or 5 years of structural balance within the vast majority of our funds. We didn't get to that place overnight. It took us 2 to 3 years to turn a $6 million structural imbalance in the general fund and a $6 million structural balance in the road fund into structural balance for several years. So that was great work. We did it collaboratively. We focused. We did things like look at our employee health insurance. How can we manage that more effectively? We shifted to a self-funded health plan. We opened a wellness clinic. We created incentives for employees to participate in health and wellness in a different way, not just carrying around the plastic card thinking that's health insurance, but really every day we get up and we participate as individuals in that. And we've done a great job of stabilizing and beating the market on our health insurance costs. Our debt management, we've talked a lot about PERS debt and how to manage those expenses. So those are things we've done in the past, we can continue to do, but we need to sort of evolve and move to that next phase of thinking about the complexity and the interwoven aspects of our resources. So I want to thank the Budget Committee for what we feel has been a really thoughtful and deliberative discussion so far. We know you have some business to do tonight. I want to particularly thank the staff in the organization that have worked so hard over the past several months in entering budgets, and especially, of course, our budget manager, Christine Moody, and our central budget staff, Joe and Tanya and Jill, for their great work throughout this process. They do so much of the behind the scenes work, and so I want to call out those individuals for really making this process go smooth. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Before we move forward, any questions for Mr. Mokayevsky? Okay, and Commissioner Buck, if I miss you up there, please speak up. You're off to my left and you're a little high, so if I miss you, please speak up. Okay, so we've got a process to go through this evening. We've received a number of presentations from county departments, and we've had the opportunity to ask questions to them, both in person and to submit questions, and those responses have been provided back to us in a spreadsheet form from staff. Thank you very much for organizing those for us. And in front of us, we have some items that we know about this evening. We have a couple of proposals that have come forward from members of the committee for potential adjustments. We also have other opportunities, it looks like here, for discussions to be brought to the table. And then we have one item that has been provided to us in a budget addition request memo that has to do with developmental disabilities. And so are there any questions before we move forward with those three sections? Yes.
Yeah, Chair, if it's not too inconvenient, I would appreciate a written document of the Q&A to date. Is that already? Is there a printed version? I know it's on the folder, the electronic folder. But if it's possible to get a printout of the Q&A as of today, that would be much appreciated. I wasn't able to get on that folder today.
Sure, we're able to do that. We don't have it, but yes, we can definitely print
If
it.
it's not too inconvenient, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Any other items? Okay. So, Ms. Moody, what do we have up here on the screen right now?
So these are the two proposals that we received from Budget Committee members as of Tuesday. So the first two lines are both the same one. If you can tell that, the kind of dotted line in between, because you're impacting two different funds. And then the second one, just one fund there.
Excellent. So I think what we'll do first is I'll ask the person who proposed those to give a brief overview of what you're proposing and comment on that. And then I'm going to ask the group if there are 4 people that want to discuss it further. And if there are that many, I'm going to make a note of it, and then we'll do the same thing with the second one. And those that receive 4 votes to move forward, we'll discuss in full. And if they don't receive that, they'll drop. So let's start with Commissioner Bosevich. You have a proposal?
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal is to allocate $650,000 of video lottery funds to the Land Management Division. And basically that's based on the nexus of land management having a connection to economic development. Prior to this, the board has funded one position in land management with video lottery dollars prior to this. This will bring us up close to the board's policy of spending no more than 50% of video lottery dollars on staff. But my hope is with this allocation, Land Management Division can relook at their fee increase proposals for building permits, land use actions, and other permitting because they are an enterprise fund, and potentially keep those increases down to some degree. But that's the intent, is to have some support for that function coming out of this source of funding. Right now, the funding's being set aside and is building a reserve for future infrastructure projects yet unknown. So that's where it's coming from.
Excellent. Thank you. So can I see a show of hands of those that would like to discuss this further, please? Commissioner Buck, I see yours. Thank you very much. We have more than 4. I'll make a note of that here. And then we'll move forward. And Commissioner Farr, if you could give us a summary of your proposal, please.
Thank you, Chair. Trevor Ludman. My proposal is $25,662 total, $22,781 from reserves, and $2,881 from my personal office fund. And this is to fund and subsidize the community outreach for Santa Clara River Neighborhood Association and River Road Neighborhood Association. These are neighborhood associations that operate inside and outside the city limits, but entirely inside of the urban growth boundary. The community organizations that operate entirely inside the city limits of Eugene, pardon me, I should have said Eugene, are subsidized by the city of Eugene in full. These neighborhoods are not. And so in order to get the complete outreach to the full neighborhood and get the maximum participation in their meetings, and I'll give you a brief rundown on the types of things that they accomplish through the meetings. This would allow them to do their 12-month outreach throughout the entire year. And once again, it's a total of $25,662, $22,781 would come from reserves, and $2,881 from my personal office account. And for instance, I'll give some of the River Road neighborhood accomplishments. They held 11 general meetings and 12 board meetings and 2 board retreats. But significantly, the outreach, they have up to 148 neighbors attending their meetings, and it's because they do have a robust outreach. We did subsidize their outreach last year. And the types of things that happen inside, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we all know about it. I'm looking at Sheriff Harold because he knows all about this. They have urban treasures, but no urban supports. This is the community that lives inside of the urban growth boundary, outside of the city limits. So this is a small amount to help them outreach to the community, and they do a superb job. I can go on for a while, but I think I've gone on too long already, Mr. Morgan. I see.
Show of hands, please, of those that would like to discuss it further. Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Very good. We have +4, more than 4 on that, so we'll discuss both of those. Okay, so we could have a little bit of a robust discussion on this. Commissioner Bosevich, you gave us a pretty good overview of your proposal. Anything else to add before we ask for anything else from other people?
No, I think
pretty much covered it?
Yeah, pretty much covered it. Thank you.
Excellent. Other discussion about that first proposal, please. Yes, Commissioner Traeger.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. This would simply allocate for the coming fiscal year. It's a one-time allocation. It's not a policy change or a structural change, and it would be then revisited in the next budget cycle to see if continuation or a change in the amount was in order. Is that right?
Yeah, well, can't obligate future boards to spending decisions. We can only budget for the fiscal year we're budgeting for. I would hope that there is discussion of this in the future because I think this is a serious need, and it's one of our distressed funds in the county. And I think it's a leading edge to housing and a leading edge to economic development, and ultimately a leading edge to revenue for the county as assessed value developed by the permits issued tends to also help our coffers for the general fund.
Thank you. I agree. I just wanted to get that in the record and make that really clear as much for anyone in the future or in the moment watching who doesn't understand that, that we can't obligate future, and also in case we come up with some other brilliant ways of finding some funding that we can preserve those lottery dollar funds or reallocate them. So thank you for that clarification and confirmation.
Mr. Hazen.
Just a clarification, if I could ask for the reference to reducing an allocation to infrastructure projects. What are we giving up?
Want to address that, Steve?
Sure, I can provide that answer. So right now we allocate usually the balance after certain obligations that have already been assigned to video lottery into a department ID is what we call it, called infrastructure projects. Really for future projects. So this is not a defined list of projects already. There has been discussion of using it for Goshen in the future.
Sorry, using it for Goshen, I'm not sure what that means. I apologize.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to expand. The video lottery funds are state revenues that are provided to counties for, generally speaking, for economic development investment. And so we currently use the video lottery dollars that we collect to fund our community and economic development staff, which are 2 people. Right now it's 1 person, to do that work. We fund, as Ms. Moody said, and Commissioner Bozich may have alluded to this, 1 position in land management, a planner. I think that's the bulk.
Also youth services,
Right.
Job training at their MLK Education Center.
The rest of the revenue, so that's where a portion of the revenue from video lottery currently goes to fund those ongoing costs and operations. The rest of the revenue goes into this infrastructure fund. And the focus over the last several years has been to invest those dollars, to save those dollars, to be able to build up a reserve that would then fund larger catalytic economic development projects. For example, redevelopment of the Goshen corridor. So that's a project that that has been contemplated to be developed for various commercial and industrial uses, but requires some significant investment to the water and sewer systems. And so that was a thought. So I think your question is, what's the trade-off here, right? And that is the trade-off. We do still have some resources in reserve that could fund existing programs. I think the question really for the budget committee is what is the priority? These are allowable uses, and we have conferred, with legal counsel and land management about how the funds would be used. And we do believe that it's an appropriate use of funds. So it's really I think a question about where the priorities are in terms of funding.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I appreciate in this hybrid meeting, I can't see you anymore. I can only see the Excel spreadsheet. First off, I do want to say that I'm supportive. This is a pretty big chunk of money for the budget committee in and of itself to consider. As a everyday resident citizens, I can see them raise their eyebrow going, well, wow, this is a pretty significant policy change that normally comes from the board. But we do see it here today, and it's not without an alternative of what it would otherwise be used for. But I am very supportive of funding and trying to find creative solutions to support our essential services and land management. So I appreciate this, and I am supportive. Thank you.
Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Just a question about the use of the funds. I'm understanding is the bulk of these would be used to try to keep costs and fees down?
That is my intent. If we don't allocate these funds, these positions will be funded from reserves of land management, which they will have to eventually replenish. And one of the things land management is going to be bringing in front of the Board of Commissioners in the next several months is a proposal to raise fees to replenish those reserves.
Okay.
So if this can offset the use of those reserves, it may decrease that request for permit fees accordingly. That's the intent. Okay. So it's we're either way we're pulling from one reserve or another, and with the infrastructure reserve, there's no requirement basically to make it back good again. But under land management, ultimately, if they use up their reserve, won't be able to weather an odd department in that permits go up and down.
Right.
So they have to have enough reserve to weather downturns in permit activity. Or they have to de-staff, and then when it turns back up, there's that delay in staffing, and people are waiting long periods for permits.
So it's to maintain basically the strength of the department and its operation.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
And we'll either do that with permit fee increases, or we can do it with this video lottery fund.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Chair Flodman, I maybe should have mentioned that we do have Keir Miller online if you do have questions for him.
Oh, excellent.
Manager of Land Management.
I know Commissioner Trigg, but just to Commissioner Bozich, what this would do is it would alleviate some of the pressure, both from either reducing staff and increasing fees. It will not relieve all of the pressure because the structural imbalance in the land management fund is well over $1 million. I think it's closer to $2 million. And we have been burning through, they have a larger reserve there because they built that reserve up in that fund over several years to be able to deal with the economic fluctuations that Commissioner Bozievich talked about, but it's not sustainable. So this would go a long way to reducing the impact of fee increases and staff reductions, but it would not completely eliminate that.
Yeah, understood.
Commissioner Trigger.
Yeah, thank you, County Administrator. That was essentially where I was going to go with that. Was I want to make sure that we're not doing board business in a budget committee meeting and making promises or commitments or decisions about future actions of the board around fee increases or other mechanisms with the should this change be approved. So, and just pointing out that very thing, that this doesn't make it whole and is also not sustainable, but just getting that clarity is really important to me.
Any other discussion? I'm ready for a motion.
So I would like to move to allocate $650,000 of video lottery to land management and to reduce the allocation to infrastructure projects and to allocate, sorry, trying to read two lines at the same time. I think that covers it. Thank you.
We have a second.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, we will vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Commissioner Buck, I see you as well. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, let's go on and we'll go to the next one. Commissioner Farr, you gave us a pretty good summary. Any other quick comments before I move to others?
Just this, that the organizations are working closely with the City of Eugene and the county on the refinement plan for the neighborhood. That's an ongoing process. Ultimately leads toward, well, I'm not going to say the words, but leads toward a more stable situation out there.
Excellent. And if I could start with a question myself. So Commissioner Farr, we saw this one, a similar one last year, is that correct?
Yes.
Is there a function in the county that is normally associated in these type of activities?
You know, the urban reserve is just is an outlier. You know, once again, there's nothing very much. We rely on the city to provide much of the code enforcement, for instance, and all of the requirements for building. And as new building occurs out there, of course, it becomes annexed into the city. But really, because of the nature of the urban reserve, the county doesn't really have anything to address it generally. Now, potentially next year, I would ask for something to be placed permanently in the budget, considering this portion of the urban reserve, but not this year.
Other questions? Mr. Hazen.
So, Chair Vlobin, could you just remind the committee what was the decision last year? Because I recall, as you do, that this was proposed last year. Did this pass last year? Don't?
Yes, it
yes.
did.
It did.
It
Okay.
passed last year.
Okay. Thank you.
So it was funded through this same mechanism last year.
Got it. Okay. Now I understand the comment about a long-term budget item as well. Thank you.
And you reminded me, Mr. Hazen, I said urban reserve. What I meant to say was urban transition, which is the, okay. So it's not actually urban reserve. Other
Questions or items to bring up on this issue? Your motion.
Thank you, Chair Vlodman. I move that for the budget process we remove that we allocate $25,662 to the River Road Community Organization for outreach to neighborhood groups, to the neighborhood, and that the funding come $22,781 from reserves and at $2881 from my personal Commissioner Farr's account.
Excellent. Is there a second? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any additional discussion, Commissioner Bozievich?
Thank you. explained this last year. I'll be voting against this motion in part because I feel like, one, it's an obligation the city of Eugene created through their neighborhood association system, where they created all these neighborhood associations under their umbrella, but then chose not to fully fund the mailings of associations that had unincorporated areas within them. That means that, you know, if we're going to do this for River Road and Santa Clara, if Springfield decides to form neighborhood associations and has a North Hayden Bridge neighborhood association and chooses not to fund the unincorporated areas of Hayden Bridge, are we also going to subsidize those mailings? If the city of Florence does the same thing with the Cedar Beach area, and on and on and on. It's using funds to fill a requirement created by one municipality. I think, you know, they do some great work. We're doing some great planning work out there in River Road, Santa Clara. I just think it establishes a bad precedent, and is, you know, taxing people from those areas like Hayden Bridge and the Cedar Beach to subsidize River Road, Santa Clara, you know, unincorporated residents, communications from a City of Eugene organized, you know, community associations. And having lived in River Road and gone to many Santa Clara, you know, the actual meetings are dominated by regulars and not necessarily totally representative of the entire community at times. So I would just, you know, I really appreciate that Commissioner Forrest added his own personal office funds in this year, and I have absolutely no objection. And frankly, similar to my use of my office funds to support the stand down, you know, that's something he can do without a budget committee action. So I just wanted to explain why I'm going to be voting no, and I'm sure I'm probably going to be the only no vote.
Any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. I have a question for our budget manager, if it's not too on the spot, about what percentage of the reserves does $25,662, or excuse me, $22,781 represent? Or just how big are
very small? Yeah, way less than 1%. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other discussion on the motion?
Sure.
Commissioner
Thank you, Chair. I don't even need to say this, but the 2881 coming from my personal account was to offset the subsidy that Commissioner Bozovich talked about regarding the other unincorporated areas, or unincorporated areas inside of the urban growth boundaries.
Excellent. One comment myself, Commissioner Farr, I think this is there's definitely this purpose out there. I don't think I could see myself doing a third year necessarily without it coming through a normal county function. That's one of the things that I take from our budget official in the process of budgeting and so forth. So very supportive of communities and so forth, but just a thought for me. So any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Traeger.
I just noticed, I think Commissioner Buck was communicating in the chat, and I think staff has that. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Excellent. I do not see Commissioner Buck on screen, so I can't tell if her hand's up. Is that?
Working on it.
Okay.
My hand isn't up. We're just trying to figure out how I can see all of you. That's all.
Excellent. I just wanted to check. Thank you, Commissioner Buck.
We look marvelous, by the way.
Okay, seeing no additional discussion on the motion, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. I see Commissioner Buck's hand. All those opposed, Commissioner Bozovich, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, so those are the two major motions that were presented in advance. Ms. Moody, what do we have on screen here?
So this here you heard about during the presentation from Health and Human Services related to developmental disabilities. This is for funding that they've already received from the state of Oregon. They're needing to hire additional staff. They're lapsing too much money year over year, so they'll be using this money. and then it will generate additional state revenue in the future. So adding 15 FTE and the expenses associated with those FTE.
Excellent. Any other questions in respect to this proposal? We've seen this. There is a budget memo on this that we've all received. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Trigger.
Chair, I'll move that we approve the request from Developmental Disabilities to increase the beginning fund balance for 15 FTE using received state funds.
Any discussion on the motion? Oh, second.
I'll second the motion. Okay.
Please, go ahead.
I'll second the motion.
Hazen, thank you very much for the second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Commissioner Buck's hands up. That's all of us. Unanimous passes. Thank you. Okay. Did we have another, did I see another piece of spreadsheet on the list?
The other document you have is the motions. I think we're working on bringing that up for you.
I'm gonna not bring it up so Heather can see everybody.
Okay, is that okay? You all have a printed copy in front of you?
We do,
Okay.
and I will actually take us down the path. I've got one here that's like blank. That's, I guess, is this for in case something comes up at this meeting?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, our standard procedure for this committee is to provide the proposals in advance so they can be properly vetted. And we've gone through that process, Commissioner Bosevich, Commissioner Farr, and so forth. But we as a committee do have the ability to take additional actions this evening. Does anybody have any other items to bring up at this time? Seeing none, we'll move forward.
Chair Vlemin, can I just follow up on the request for the Q&A printed? Is that available, or?
Staff is down here, so I don't know if somebody went up. Yeah, we can have somebody go up.
Okay, thank you. I was hoping to refer to that as we went through these next section. Thank you.
Okay. So we're at the process.
I think someone signed up. If you.
Budget staff, do we have somebody for public comment? No. Okay. Just checking. So we're at the process for the set of motions that we have for us. Is there any other topics to discuss before we start moving through the preset set of motions? Okay, I'm open. Mr. Pryor, please.
Yes, I move to approve the fiscal year 2022-2023 Lane County permanent tax rate of $1.2793 per thousand of assessed value.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Commissioner Buck, everybody's hands are up. Motion passes.
Keep going.
Love to.
I move approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 local option tax for jail and critical use services in the amount of 55 cents per thousand of assessed value, with 50 cents for jail services and 5 cents for youth services.
Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. I have a quick question just to confirm. Is this at the top of the levy amount?
This is the full amount approved by voters, yes.
Excellent. Any others? Commissioner Bosevich, please.
I just want to say this briefly. I vote yes on this in honor of former Sheriff Tom Turner.
Right. Yeah. Other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. Buck's hands up. All hands are up. Motion passes.
Move approval of the fiscal year 2022-2023 local option tax to support 4-H and OSU extension programs in Lane County in the amount of 0.028 cents per $1,000 of assessed value.
Is there a second?
A second.
Very good. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor, hand please. Commissioner Buck's hands up. All hands are up. Motion passes.
Chair Blobman, would you like an explanation of the next motion? I'm not sure if all the I see some nodding. So.
Why don't we start with that
Okay.
please?
This one's a little different. So this is needed because our lane code designates that transient room tax can be used for capital expenses at the Lane Event Center. It does not specifically call out parks. However, lane code also says that allocations can be made through the annual budget process. So we've followed this process of any time our operational funds are needed by either Lane Event Center or parks, we have you do a motion and specify what that approved dollar amount is.
Any question for budget staff before we move forward on that? Excellent. Mr. Pryor?
Move approval to allow the use of transient room tax dollars for operational purposes consistent with Lane Code 4.005.175D, E, and F, and ORS 320.350 as follows. Lane Event Center, $1,021,135, and Lane County Parks Division, $732,677.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor, hand please. Commissioner Buck's hands up. You may. So all those opposed? Those abstentions? Mr. Hazen? Mr. Hazen abstains. Motion passes.
I move approval of the entire fiscal year 2022-2023 budget with all adjustments approved by the Budget Committee.
Second.
Discussion on the motion.
Yeah,
Mr. Hazen.
I would just like to make one comment that it was striking to me in the earlier discussion of public feedback on the on priorities when it came to public health. That mental health services was very clearly. I mean, there were a couple of things below that around COVID, which we know is a temporal situation we need to deal with. But mental health services is something that's here to stay, and I hope to hear more in the years to come from this commission and from the administration about how we can proactively address mental health across our community. There was mention of the respite center, I believe, was one of the budget items. I don't know if I'm calling it correctly. There was a
Crisis and Stabilization Center.
Thank you. Yeah, Crisis and Stabilization Center, which responds to crisis clearly. But I think we have a lot of opportunities these days to get ahead of mental health and before they become crisis. And so I hope that the commission can take a stronger leadership role in driving budget expenditures in that area in the future, and that we can see the performance that may outlast the terms of many of the commissioners on, at the point, but that's something that I hope to see in the future. So that's my only comment on the motion.
Commissioner Park.
Thank you, Chair Blodman, and bravo on the comment. I'd like to point out that District Attorney Perlow and Sheriff Harold is in the room, as well as Chief Deputy Wilkerson. All three of them this morning sat in on the mental health summit, which we have every month. There's a mental health summit that is a very broad table. I believe Mr. Rakoff, you were there this morning also, and that summit addresses exactly that, Mr. Hazen, finding ways to be innovative in making certain we're ahead, getting ahead, and diverting people from, for instance, jail, and doing the best we can with the resources we have. Thank you for pointing it out. It is a major topic for discussion and a major focus of this Board of Commissioners.
Thank you. I look forward to learning more about that summit. Yeah.
Commissioner Traeger.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate staff for all their work. I know that every year there's just a tremendous amount of work that happens before we get to this opportunity to pass the budget, and also appreciate everybody's responsiveness to this committee's conversations last year in making a more focused and abbreviated process this year, where we really just could dig in a little deeper on fewer topics, the issue areas that we're really able to have any influence on through this process. So just my appreciation and my thanks.
Other discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Commissioner Buck's hands, all hands are up. Motion passes unanimously. That brings us to the end of those motions. We still have some additional business we're going to cover here real quick. One of the items that Mr. Mokrajewski and I would like to discuss is the committee process piece. And we've learned a lot over, this committee has been the same for 2 years running. So we saw the way it happened in 2021 and many years before. And then the somewhat modified process. I really think that the heart of it's very much the same, but that we took a different focus, as Commissioner Traeger mentioned. And so I would like to open it up for discussion and comments about how this process went and how the feedback we can give directly to staff about how we would like to see this go next year. So, discussion. Mr. Hazen, you have something to say, I can say.
No, I'll defer my comments.
Sure. Others, we do need to give feedback. So, do we like it? Do we not like it? Mr. Pryor.
Sure. I'll go. And I think this was echoed by some other folks that really the forward-looking aspect of the budget is really, really extremely helpful. Going over what we did last year is not really that helpful for knowing how to spend the money going forward. So I think when departments and the budget comes forward to say, here's how we propose to spend this money on these things going forward, it's extremely helpful and instructive to me and doesn't obscure the effort to go forward. I think if a budget doesn't have a lot of changes, if a fund doesn't have a lot of changes, I don't need to hear a lot about it. I'll review it in the budget document to make sure that things look okay. But other than that, I think having presentations to talk about structural changes, structural imbalances, and structural things moving forward, to me, was most helpful. I think we as budget committee members have a responsibility to look at the actual budget document itself. Things I look for are interfund transfers. Things I look for are asset allocations and things like that. But I don't need to spend a lot of time in the budget committee meeting going over those unless I have a specific question. So I was very pleased with the process. I thought it went very efficiently and very well. But I think the takeaway for me was the looking forward aspect really helped me a lot.
Excellent. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Vladimir. And the takeaway for me usually is a quote that occurs during a particular meeting. And the quote from this year's budget was made by Councillor Mr. Pryor, and that was Mr. Mokrajewski. And I think this goes for the process and the budget itself. This budget did not stink.
Other comments?
I'll comment. I appreciated the increased focus on specific departments this year. I think that serves this process very well. I appreciate the continuing efforts by department leaders to think through what are the key performance measures that they want to report to this committee. I think that is supportive of effective communication with the citizenry about what they're getting for their tax dollars. So I hope that those efforts can continue. My own personal business experience with metrics is the value of metrics has a lot to do with how they are responding to changing conditions. And so I hope that as this process continues, that department leaders each year reflect on what are the metrics that matter most to the committee, what are the measures that matter most to the public. It's been pointed out by other committee members that, there are a lot of the members of the public may not look at those numbers. Some will. And I think it's valuable for Lane County government to connect with those members of the public for whom those measures do matter. And they do look at those numbers. I think there's value in engaging with those members in the public. The only other comment I would make is kind of something that other committee members haven't heard from me before, but just I was reflecting on the kind of process question that you've just asked for feedback on, Herb, earlier this week. And just want to throw an idea out there that it would be, I think, very helpful for citizen committee members to hear a little bit more from the commissioners about how they see the budget implementing the strategic direction of the commission. I don't know how else to word that. I think I'll just leave it at there. Pretty simple. Just, how, from the commissioners. That's something that I think could help bring us together as a committee.
Other comments? I would also ask how this went for staff. So from the other side and so forth, Mr. Murkowski, I think you said that to some extent it lowered the burdens on some departments. And how was this year?
I mean, you can think for a second. And I think the department staff was really pleased. I think they felt like there was, as opposed to having this kind of, there's a lot of pressure. Our departments want to present the best to you and to the public, and so they put a lot into the presentations. It's a lot of work, and they bring their teams, and it's a double-edged sort of thing, because I think the folks that didn't present this year, in some ways they felt like, well, we don't have to prepare all that information. In other ways, they were like, well, we kind of want to present though. So there is, there's a double-edged thing there. I think that on the whole, it went really well. I mean, I think it's nice for the committee that is part of your role is deliberative. Part of your role is trying to understand everything that's in this several hundred-page document in a very compressed amount of time. If you're having to look, like you focus at everything equally, you're kind of, you're spreading your time out equally as though it's all the same, and it's not all the same. So I think that there were some things that were really successful this year, and I've heard that from several of you, that there was a focus. It gave a little bit more space and time to contemplate and deliberate, and I think we saw that on the last day of the committee meeting upstairs, where we had some time then, and there was this sort of discussion about land management and video lighting, and there was a really good discussion. And there have been years in the budget process I don't see that discussion happen because you don't have the time to do it. So I think that's a really important reflection to go, we can just report everything to you, and it's kind of confusing, or we can focus the effort. So I think there's some takeaways that were really positive.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have that much more to add than that, although I would agree that it feels like maybe the intensity of the couple weeks of committee feels lower, that it's not quite so go every second for staff. The information they're providing back to the committee, it's helpful when it's focused, of course. So they're not working on it nonstop throughout this process. So, and then I want to thank the committee for being so flexible with us as we've worked to do this hybrid. And huge kudos to our staff, Tanya Ellis in particular, making these meetings happen. First public hybrid meeting here in Harris Hall, so excited by that. But I feel that it was a very successful process for staff, so thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Bosevich.
So, having gone through 12 budgets now, I think this process this year was one of the best that we've had. So I fully support the idea of focusing on, like we did on areas of change or areas of need, providing that time for that conversation. And I appreciate Mr. Hazen's comments about how the strategic plan and the budget kind of come together. And it's kind of funny because they feed off of each other in a lot of ways. Based on our strategic plan, we lobbied the state and the federal government for funding in advance to try and support our priorities. And then when we're executing this budget, it reflects the funding we've been able to achieve based on those lobbying efforts quite often. So we may not outwardly say it, but there's, we have, funding based on grants we went after, based on our strategic priorities that were in this budget. So it's pulling all that apart, and we'll continue to try and develop revenue sources that way. We'll continue to look at things like my request around LMD is partly based on our priority around housing and how it's such a huge priority for us in all things, and housing and mental health are tied together, and there's so many pieces of this. There was money in this budget that was based on and I'm going to forget the name, and Greg might be able to remind me of a particular grant we got from the state, and it was a new $10 million they allocated in the Christmas tree budget of 2021, based on Association of Oregon Counties and other people lobbying for that mental health money, and we got a significant piece of that. So those are the, it's hard to, our strategic plan leads our lobbying efforts, which get us funding, which could end up being reflected in the budget. The budget priorities of how we move money around sometimes are based on our strategic plan, and even right down to last minute changes kind of are based on our priorities. I don't think we'd get 10-0 votes on those changes if it didn't match the board's priorities in some ways. But yeah, I think that strategic plan drives us from going after everything from revenue to the very first meeting we have in December or January to start the next year's budget is driven by those strategic plan priorities. So, and I think this year's budget reflects our strategic plan, and I think the process we did this year has been probably the best of the 12 I've been through. Probably the most somewhat enjoyable, because I went through a couple of years where it really wasn't fun to be on the budget, and those public hearings we had where no one showed up, hours of testimony of people wanting to protect their particular, whether it was from the ice rink to some program for kids, not wanting it to be cut. So yeah, it's far nicer to have it where we're not spending hours listening to people tell you how important their particular program is and how it changed their kid's life, or and please don't cut this, and we're having to make those kind of decisions. So it's been a great budget year.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I've always felt that our budget each year is the single biggest statement of the county's values to the public and to the residents. And this year is no different. We certainly have things we're going to keep a closer eye on, but the budget as a whole is solid. And I too want to appreciate staff for all their hard effort. And I appreciate being the guinea pig in one of these first hybrid meetings that we're having. It's a great way to, I think, include the public in the future, should they want to be more participatory, either in this budget meeting or how we'll work on this in our first board meeting next week as a hybrid. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
Other comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Waldman. Just one thing I'd like to add is, and along the lines of what Commissioner Buzzwich was talking about, Ms. Mokryski, let's look at our DD allocation. We added 15 FTEs in developmental disabilities. It's an indication of the work that we do getting things in place here in Lane County to leverage outside money. None of that money comes from locally generated taxation, other than indirectly, and that's 15 FTEs. So we can rejoice as a community that the money that we put into developmental disabilities in this budget process will leverage into thousands and thousands and thousands of client hours with people who otherwise would not be served, that will be served in the coming year. So this is pretty wonderful, the kinds of things that we do. It doesn't not just not stink. It smells pretty darn good. So.
And then if I could myself, one of the things, we've had a couple of comments or discussions where people have said, when new members join the committee. And one of the things is after COVID is mostly in the back window and so forth, I think that there is benefit to some of the programs that we've seen in the past, the Budget Buddy portion, tours. I've toured the jail. I toured parks, and I've been to parks in Lane County all my life, but you see them differently when you visit them with somebody who operates them and maintains them and points out pieces that are falling apart, literally. So I think that those are opportunities that could be leveraged in the future as well, to put that connection between committee members and those individual activities. So those are items to be kept in the back of the mind as well. So other comments or feedback? Okay, does that give you enough to go with? Good. Other committee business of any type? Moody, do you have anything else from staff?
No, thank you.
Okay. I call the budget committee meeting closed.